The stars had always called to humanity, but for centuries they had remained far away, like a dream locked behind glass. Humanity had walked on the moon, sent machines to Mars, and reached out with radio waves that whispered into the silence. Yet even as the 21st century turned into the 22nd, Earth's people were still bound by limits. They were clever, stubborn, and endlessly curious, but the galaxy was vast and their reach was short. Then came the Valari. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They were not even explorers in the sense that humanity imagined. The Valari were wanderers, quiet and gentle, traveling the lanes of the galaxy like ancient nomads. Their ships were small, built more for endurance than for power, and their people were thin with soft eyes that reflected starlight. When humanity first met them, many were surprised. The Valari were not the mighty aliens people had imagined in their stories and films. They were simple in some ways, fragile in others. But they carried with them the weight of knowledge gathered from countless years among the stars. The meeting happened not in battle, not in conquest, but in accident. A human colony ship, Hope's Dawn, had drifted off course. Its engines were damaged by a storm of radiation near the edge of the Proxima system. The colonists aboard feared they would be lost in the void, unable to repair their ship or call for rescue. But it was the Valari who found them. With patience and skill, the aliens guided the crippled human ship through the storm, shielding it with their own vessel, patching systems with tools that seemed almost too delicate to work. They asked for nothing in return. When Earth's leaders later tried to offer payment, trade, or promises, the Valari only smiled and gave a simple answer. Perhaps one day, you will do the same for another. It was a kindness, quiet and unshaken, and humanity did not forget. The years passed. Humanity grew. With Valari maps of the safe lanes through dangerous regions of space, Earth's explorers reached further than ever before. Colonies bloomed on worlds once thought unreachable. Fleets of trade ships carried goods between distant systems, building connections that tied scattered settlements into something greater. The Valari themselves remained distant but friendly, visiting from time to time, always offering guidance but never asking for anything. Among humans, the story of the Valari kindness became a tale told in classrooms and whispered in families. Teachers spoke of it as the moment humanity's path into the wider galaxy truly began. Children imagined the fragile alien ships shielding their ancestors. Sailors on long trade routes told the story to remind themselves that kindness was never wasted. Even soldiers in training heard the words, repeated almost like a quiet oath. Perhaps one day you will do the same. Yet as decades turned into centuries, not everyone remembered. To some, the story became a myth, a piece of history buried beneath the noise of politics, trade, and conflict. But the Valari remembered, and so did a few humans, especially those who carried the old tales in their hearts. Then came the storm. It began on the edge of Valari space, where the Drakthar Dominion moved like a shadow. The Drakthar were not like the Valari. They were strong, cold, and ruthless, a species that believed survival was only for those who could take it by force. Their fleets were massive, armored with layers of dark metal, bristling with weapons that glowed like suns. They had already devoured smaller civilizations, stripping worlds for resources and enslaving survivors. To the Drakthar, the Valari were weak, an easy prey. The first Valari colony to fall was little more than a research outpost. The Dominion did not simply capture it. They burned it to ash. Survivors fled in scattered ships carrying warnings. The second colony resisted with what little defense it had, but their small ships were no match for the storm that came. The Drakthar destroyed them without hesitation, and again the galaxy looked away. Great powers turned their eyes aside. Some were afraid. Others calculated that standing against the Dominion would cost too much. A few even whispered that perhaps the Valari's time was over and nothing could be done. The Valari, once wanderers safe in their quiet paths, now stood on the edge of extinction. Desperate, they sent signals, not to the great alliances, not to the mighty empires, but to Earth. The message was carried across light years, wrapped in ancient codes and simple words. It was not a demand. It was not even a request for war. It was a plea, spoken in the same gentle voices that had once comforted a lost human ship. We ask only for help. If it is within your hearts to give, we remember what was once shared between our people. On Earth, the message did not pass quietly. In the great chambers of government, leaders listened in silence. In the halls of the military, commanders measured the strength of fleets against the power of the Drakthar. In the streets and homes of common people, whispers spread. Many asked, could humanity truly stand against such a force? But there was another question, louder, older, and deeper. Did they not owe a debt? It was not a debt written in treaties. It was not a debt of trade or law. It was something older, something simpler, the debt of kindness. The Valari had given humanity their hand when they had nothing to gain. They had asked for nothing in return. And now, when they stood on the edge of ruin, the question was no longer about power or fear. It was about loyalty. Some argued that humanity was not ready. The Dominion is vast, they said. We are young. We cannot risk our colonies, our fleets, our people. Others answered with fire in their voices. The Valari saved us when no one else would. If we turn away now, what does that make us? The debate was fierce, but it was not endless. Humanity had always been a species of decision, of action, of taking steps even when the ground beneath them was uncertain. And so the answer came. The leaders of Earth spoke with one voice, clear and steady. We owe a favor and we will pay it. Across the colonies, fleets stirred. Old ships were refitted, their hulls reinforced. New weapons were tested. Crews volunteered in numbers so great that many had to be turned away. Men and women from every corner of Earth and every settlement in the stars stepped forward, not for conquest, not for glory, but for loyalty. The message was sent back to the Valari, short and simple. Stand fast. You are not alone. And so the story of the debt began to turn. The galaxy, watching from the shadows, doubted that humanity could make any difference. They were still young, still small compared to the vast powers that ruled the stars. But the humans did not measure themselves by the scale of their fleets or the size of their empire. They measured themselves by something else, by the fire in their hearts, by the promises they kept, and by the friends they would not abandon. The Valari had once given humanity a hand in the darkness. Now humanity would repay that gift not with whispers, not with silence, but with fire and fury. The call came quietly at first, almost like a whisper through the void. The Valari, though known for their patience, had never sounded so urgent. Their signal reached Earth through layers of space and silence, a message encoded in a language of stars and light. To the casual observer, it might have seemed only a flicker. But for those who had long studied the galaxy's signals, it carried unmistakable weight. It was more than a call for help. It was a plea from old friends, a reminder that time and distance could never erase the bond forged long ago. Humanity had a choice. Ignore it like the rest of the galaxy, or answer and risk everything. In the command halls of Earth's space agencies and the newly unified solar fleet, the debate was fierce. We are small, argued Admiral Chen, standing before a hollow projection of the Drakthar Dominion fleets. The metal ships seemed to stretch endlessly across the projection, their black hulls glowing with the orange light of energy weapons. They are a force older than our colonies. We cannot fight them alone. If we go to destruction. But we cannot ignore them, replied Captain Mara Vance, her eyes sharp under the harsh lighting of the council room. The Valari saved us when we were lost, when our people drifted in the void with failing engines and no hope. And now they are calling for help. Do we turn our backs on them? Are we nothing more than cowards? A silence followed her words, heavy and uneasy. Many in the room knew she was right. The Valari had extended their hand when humanity was small, offering guidance, knowledge, and a path forward. That debt was not one of money or trade. It was a debt of loyalty, of honor, and of heart. The council debated further, voices rising and falling like the tides. Scientists spoke of weapon systems, engineers of fleet readiness, politicians of risk and public opinion. But beneath every argument was the same question. Could humanity make a difference? And beneath it, stronger than doubt, was the echo of that old truth. Humanity did not walk away from friends. Finally, after long hours, the decision was made. It was simple in its clarity and profound in its meaning. Earth would answer the call. The announcement spread quickly across the colonies. Human worlds, from Mars to Titan, from orbital stations to distant settlements on exoplanets, prepared for action. Ships were refitted, retrofitted, and rearmed. Engineers worked tirelessly, converting cargo freighters into light warships and research vessels into rapid response units. Scientists modified energy weapons, tested new shield matrices, and adapted human ingenuity into deadly efficiency. The people responded too. Volunteers poured forward in numbers that astounded the council. Pilots, engineers, medics, and soldiers, ordinary humans, many who had never seen battle, signed up to stand beside the Volari. They understood that the fight would be dangerous, that loss would be inevitable. But the fire in humanity's spirit burned brighter than fear. They were answering a debt that had been entrusted to them centuries before, and they would not falter. The Volari, for their part, watched in amazement. The humans they had once saved were no longer small and fragile. They were a force, daring and determined, moving with a courage that the Volari themselves had rarely seen. The aliens sent coordinates, intelligence, and careful warnings, helping humanity navigate the treacherous paths of Volari space. They offered strategy, but left the fighting to human hands. When the first human fleet left Earth, it was not a grand parade of shining vessels, as one might expect from history's great fleets. It was modest, functional, and clever. Each ship had a purpose. Every crew had been chosen not for rank but for ability, creativity, and courage. They moved swiftly and silently through the lanes of space that the Volari had charted, avoiding detection by the Dominion wherever possible. Despite the preparation, the first encounter shook even the most confident commanders. A small Drakthar scout fleet intercepted a human supply convoy near the edges of Volari territory. The humans were outnumbered, their ships small against the massive Dominion vessels, yet they did not flee. Captain Mara Vance stood on the bridge of her flagship Intrepid, her hands steady on the controls. "Hold formation," she ordered. "Do not retreat. We are here to help. That is enough reason to fight." Her crew obeyed, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. The battle began, and it was unlike any fight humanity had known. Humans did not try to match the Dominion in raw power. They could not. Instead, they relied on ingenuity. Ships moved unpredictably, weaving through debris fields, luring the enemy into traps. Cargo pods were rigged as explosive decoys. Even old satellites were adapted as hidden mines, detonating in patterns that disabled the enemy's systems. By the time the Drakthar realized what was happening, the convoy had reached safety, and the scout fleet was forced to withdraw. It was a small victory, but it spoke volumes. Humanity would not be pushed aside, and the galaxy's greatest predators had underestimated them. News of the first success reached Earth and the Volari alike. It brought hope to those who had feared the worst and reminded the galaxy that the humans were a species that could not be ignored. More ships joined the fleet. More volunteers came forward. Plans were made for larger engagements, coordinated strikes, and daring rescues. The humans' approach was never reckless. It was calculated, daring, and always with the goal of protecting their friends. The Volari sent messages of gratitude, but also of caution. "The Dominion is relentless," they warned. "They will not forget. They will not forgive. Your strength is commendable, but you must be vigilant." Humans, however, were not daunted. They remembered the gift once given, the safe path through the storm, the hand extended when hope seemed lost. And they knew that some debts were paid not with fear or hesitation, but with action. As the fleet moved deeper into Volari space, the scale of the challenge became clear. The Dominion's forces were immense, a web of ships that spanned sectors and systems. They had captured or destroyed every Volari outpost along their path, claiming worlds and resources with brutal efficiency. But humans adapted. They learned to fight in small squads, striking swiftly at supply lines and communication hubs. They used the terrain of space itself, asteroid fields, gravitational anomalies, and nebulae to their advantage. Old freighters became ghost ships, moving silently through shadows and emerging only to strike. Every engagement was a lesson, every success a spark of confidence. For the first time in centuries, the Volari felt a glimmer of hope. The humans, once the ones they had rescued, were now rescuing them, and the galaxy watched. Other species began to notice too. Some were inspired, quietly sending aid or intelligence. Others were astonished, whispering tales of the young humans who dared to challenge the unstoppable Dominion. Humanity was not yet a superpower. They had not yet conquered the stars. But they had something far older and stronger: courage, loyalty, and an unshakable will to honor a promise. The human fleet's journey was not without hardship. Ships were lost, supplies ran low, and the Dominion tested them with relentless attacks. Yet through every challenge, humanity adapted. Where others saw limits, humans saw opportunity. Where others feared risk, humans saw duty. Each obstacle became a story of cleverness and bravery, a testament to a species that refused to surrender. And all the while, the Valari sent messages of thanks, relief, and encouragement. "Your courage will be remembered," they said. "Not just by us, but by all who see the truth of it." For the humans, it was never about recognition. It was about repayment. It was about standing by those who had once stood by them. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, they pressed forward, determined to meet the darkness with fire and fury. By the time the human fleet reached the first Valari colonies under siege, the Dominion was aware of their arrival. Their massive fleets had begun to converge, confident in their superior numbers and experience. But the humans were ready. They had studied the enemy, learned their tactics, and trained their crews for the moments that mattered most. The galaxy had doubted them. Some even mocked them, but humanity did not seek approval. They sought only to do what was right. They sought to repay a debt that was never owed in gold, but in loyalty and courage. And as the first human ships appeared on the edge of Valari space, lights blazing and engines humming, one thought united every human soul on every vessel: we are here. We will not fail. The debt will be paid. The human fleet moved like a shadow through Valari space, small but determined, calculated but daring. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed. Sensors on distant worlds recorded the glow of their engines, the patterns of their flight, and the signals of their communications. The Drakthir Dominion, confident in their overwhelming strength, initially dismissed them as minor irritants, youthful humans with no understanding of galactic war. They were wrong. Captain Mara Vance stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, her eyes tracing the navigation display as it showed the incoming Dominion scouts. The fleet was spread thin, but every ship was ready. "Remember," she said to her officers, "we do not have the largest ships. We do not have the strongest weapons. But we have the mind, the will, and the courage. That is our advantage." Her words were not empty. Every human on the bridge, from pilots to engineers to communication officers, understood what she meant. They were not here to meet brute force with brute force. They were here to fight smart, to think creatively, and to strike when the enemy least expected it. The first clash came near a cluster of small asteroids that Valari scouts called the Shattered Teeth. The Dominion fleet, confident and arrogant, approached with heavy cruisers leading the way, but the humans were already waiting. Light freighters, old cargo ships, and retrofitted research vessels glided among the rocks, invisible to Dominion sensors. Every crew member knew their role. Engineers had rigged cargo pods with explosives, timing their detonation to mimic sudden meteor strikes. Pilots used the gravitational pull of asteroids to swing their ships at impossible angles, striking from blind spots. When the first Dominion ships entered the trap, chaos erupted. Explosions tore through the asteroid field, disabling engines and scattering fleets. Human ships moved with precision, striking weak points and then retreating before the enemy could respond. The Dominion scouts, expecting a quick victory, found themselves ensnared in a fight they had not prepared for. By the end of the engagement, the Dominion had suffered losses they could not ignore. Small though the human fleet was, it had proved it could be lethal, and across the galaxy, news spread quickly. Humans were not to be underestimated. This was just the beginning. Human strategy became a pattern, though it never became predictable. They turned abandoned mining stations into trap zones, retrofitted satellites into hidden weapons, and used cargo ships as feints, luring Dominion patrols into ambushes. Each engagement was different, each plan unique. Humanity had learned that in war, creativity could outweigh sheer power. Yet these victories were not without cost. Ships were lost, brave pilots fell, their sacrifices remembered in every report and every quiet memorial held aboard the surviving ships. But humanity endured. For every loss, they learned something new. Every mistake was a lesson. Every success became a legend. The Valari watched in awe. These humans, once fragile travelers in the void, had become defenders in the truest sense. They moved with courage, with intelligence, and with a determination that the Valari had rarely seen in any species. The Dominion responded with greater force. Massive warships moved into Valari sectors, trying to trap the humans, to cut off their supply lines, and to destroy them before they could do more harm. They underestimated human resolve, and that mistake would prove costly. Captain Vance gathered her officers on the bridge. "They think they can crush us with numbers," she said. "We will show them that humans are not measured by their size or fleet strength. We are measured by what we are willing to do for those we care about, and we care for the Velari." Her plan was bold. The human fleet split into smaller squadrons, each targeting a separate segment of the Dominion forces. One squadron would hit communications arrays, another would sabotage supply ships, and a third would lure the Dominion into the shattered teeth once more. Timing was everything. Coordination was key, and trust in each other and in the training they had endured, would decide the outcome. The attacks were precise. Communications arrays were disabled, leaving the Dominion blind in certain sectors. Supply ships were destroyed, causing confusion and delays. The Dominion commanders, expecting a straightforward fight, found their orders disrupted, their strategies undone, and their fleets scattered. Human ingenuity became their deadliest weapon. Old freighters, seemingly unarmed, struck like lightning. Engineers had rigged them with advanced energy emitters and kinetic traps, turning ordinary ships into weapons of chaos. Dominion fleets, despite their superior numbers and experience, were forced to retreat again and again. Across the shattered teeth, the battle raged for days. Explosions lit the asteroid field like fireflies, beams of energy striking in brilliant arcs. Human ships darted between rocks, weaving through debris, striking and disappearing before the enemy could react. Every victory strengthened their confidence, and every success sent a message to the Velari. Humanity would not abandon them. But it was not only strategy that made humans dangerous. It was their spirit. While the Dominion fought as soldiers following orders, humans fought as friends, protecting those who had once saved them. They acted with creativity and courage, but also with heart. When the Dominion attempted to board a Velari research station, human boarding parties intercepted them. Engineers and pilots, not trained soldiers in the traditional sense, used every tool at their disposal. Magnetic grapples, improvised explosives, and even clever tricks of physics. The Dominion boarding teams were caught off guard. Ships meant to dominate through brute strength fell to clever planning, teamwork, and courage. The Velari, who had once been fragile, silent watchers of the stars, now had allies who fought not for conquest but for loyalty, and that made all the difference. As the days passed, other races in the galaxy began to take notice. Some sent aid quietly, inspired by the human courage. Others watched with disbelief, unable to understand how a young species could hold its own against the Dominion's might. Across distant systems, whispers spread. The humans are different. They do not fight for greed or glory, they fight for what is right. Back on Earth, news of these victories inspired generations of people. Families followed every report, watching with pride as humanity proved its worth among the stars. Children dreamed not of conquest but of courage, imagining themselves standing beside their heroes, facing impossible odds with bravery. Even within the fleet, the human crews felt the weight of history. They were small in number but mighty in resolve. They had a purpose, and that purpose united them across vast distances of space. Every maneuver, every strike, every daring plan was a testament to what humanity could do when it refused to back down. The Dominion, frustrated and enraged, began to escalate. Entire armadas moved to crush the human threat. They believed their power and experience would win the day. Yet every engagement showed them that humans could never be underestimated. They fought like shadows, struck like fire, and vanished before retaliation. The human fleet had become a storm in the Dominion's path, a storm of cunning, courage, and loyalty. And with every strike, the Velari colonies survived another day. Worlds that would have fallen were saved, research stations and homes protected by humans who risked everything without hesitation. Captain Vance looked at her crew during a quiet moment on the bridge of the Intrepid. "Remember this," she said softly, almost to herself. "We are not here for victory alone. We are here to honor a debt, and debts of honor are repaid with more than weapons. They are repaid with heart." Her crew nodded, understanding deeply that they were not only fighting a war, they were upholding the promise of humanity itself. By the time the Dominion retreated temporarily, their losses were severe. Ships that had once seemed unstoppable were disabled or destroyed. Their strategy had been disrupted, and for the first time, their commanders feared that humans were more than an annoyance. They were a real threat. The Valari rejoiced quietly, sending messages of thanks and encouragement. "We never thought we would see such courage," they said. "You honor us and yourselves. You remind the galaxy that the smallest hand can change the course of fate." Humanity had proven a simple truth. It was not the size of the fleet, nor the power of weapons, that determined victory, but the strength of will, the brilliance of mind, and the fire of spirit. They had arrived in Valari space as a promise, a debt to repay. And now, they had become a force the Dominion could not ignore. Captain Vance stood on the bridge looking out at the stars and thought of the first human colonists, drifting lost in the void long ago. They had needed help, and the Valari had given it. Now, centuries later, humanity had returned that help, not with hesitation, but with fire and fury. And the galaxy, watching from the shadows, had finally begun to understand. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were protectors. Humans were clever, brave, and unstoppable when their hearts and minds were united, and this was only the beginning. The galaxy had begun to whisper of humans, a small species whose courage could shake even the most fearsome powers. The Drakthar Dominion, once confident in its unstoppable might, now faced an enemy that did not fight like any other. Humanity did not meet force with force. They struck with cleverness, daring, and a burning will that could not be ignored. For the Dominion, this was unacceptable. They would not allow a small fleet of young humans to undo centuries of conquest. Across their massive star systems, they gathered their greatest forces, assembling an armada the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. Every cruiser, every battleship, every assault frigate moved to a single purpose: crush the human threat before it could grow. On the human side, the news of the Dominion's preparations reached Earth and the fleet like a distant thunderstorm. Captain Mara Vance studied the intelligence reports with a tight jaw and steady eyes. The numbers were overwhelming. The Dominion's fleet was nearly 10 times larger than humanity's, and their weapons far surpassed anything Earth had yet produced. The odds were impossible, yet no human wavered. "We knew this day would come," Mara told her officers on the bridge of the Intrepid. "We knew they would strike back with everything they had. But we are not here for fear. We are here to honor a debt, to protect those who once saved us, and that is stronger than any weapon." Her words resonated across the fleet, reaching every pilot, engineer, medic, and soldier. They did not speak of numbers or technology. They spoke of courage. And in that courage, humanity found its greatest strength. The human fleet moved strategically, using the Valari charts to navigate through nebulae, asteroid fields, and hidden lanes that masked their approach. They knew that a direct confrontation with the Dominion would be disastrous. Instead, they relied on speed, intelligence, and unpredictability. When scouts detected Dominion fleets advancing toward Valari space, human commanders made careful decisions. Small squadrons were sent to harass supply lines, ambush patrols, and create confusion. Every strike was calculated, designed to weaken the enemy without committing to full battle. The humans understood that survival depended on both ingenuity and restraint. But the Dominion's response was relentless. They sent massive ships to patrol critical sectors, their weapons blazing with destructive energy. Entire worlds that had once been safe Valari colonies trembled under the threat of bombardment. Humanity could no longer rely solely on clever attacks. They would have to stand and fight. The first engagement of the rising storm took place near the Veil Nebula, a region filled with gas clouds and magnetic anomalies. The Dominion believed they could trap the human fleet here, using their superior numbers to crush them like insects. Captain Vance ordered the fleet into position. The nebula's clouds shimmered around them, giving humans a hidden advantage. Engineers activated energy dampeners to confuse Dominion sensors, while pilots used the nebula's gravity to slingshot their ships into attack positions. It was risky but necessary. As the Dominion fleet entered the nebula, the humans struck. Mines hidden in the gas detonated near the lead ships, disabling engines and shields. Rapid-fire attacks from small, agile human vessels tore through flanks. The Dominion, expecting a slow advance, found themselves disoriented and under attack from all sides. For hours, the battle raged. Explosions lit the nebula like fireworks, beams of energy cutting through clouds of gas. Human ships darted between larger vessels, striking weak points and retreating before the enemy could respond. Every move was precise, coordinated, and daring. In the heat of the battle, the humans demonstrated not just skill but heart. A Volari transport carrying scientists and civilians became the target of a Dominion cruiser. Without hesitation, Captain Vance ordered a squadron to protect it. Light freighters, old cargo ships, and even unarmed support vessels became shields, drawing fire away from the transport and forcing the Dominion to rethink their attack. One human pilot, Lieutenant Rena Torres, executed a daring maneuver, flying her small ship directly into the path of the cruiser's weapons and guiding the transport out of danger. She returned battered and barely functional, but alive. Her bravery inspired every other human in the fleet. They were not only fighting for strategy, they were fighting for friends, for the Volari, and for the honor of humanity itself. The Dominion was forced to retreat, temporarily broken, but not defeated. They began to realize that humans were unlike any species they had faced before. They did not fight for territory, for greed, or for power. They fought for loyalty, courage, and something the Dominion could not understand: honor. As the human fleet regrouped, Captain Vance convened her officers. "The Dominion will not stop," she said. "They will gather more ships, more weapons, more resources. But we have something they cannot match: ingenuity, courage, and the will to do what is right. We will not run. We will not hide. We will meet them wherever they come and show them the power of humanity." The officers nodded. They knew the coming battles would be harder, more dangerous, and costlier. But they also knew that retreat was not an option. Humanity's purpose had never been conquest, it had been loyalty. And loyalty would guide every decision. The rising storm spread across multiple systems. Human squadrons attacked supply lines, Dominion patrols, and communications networks. They moved faster than the enemy could anticipate, using every trick of strategy, physics, and intuition. Asteroids became weapons, nebulae became shields, and ordinary ships became deadly traps. Every engagement tested their courage and creativity. Every victory, no matter how small, built confidence. And with every success, the Volari's hope grew. Worlds that had seemed lost were saved, colonies rebuilt, and civilians protected. Across the galaxy, other species began to notice. Some sent aid quietly, inspired by humanity's courage. Others watched with disbelief, unable to understand how such a young species could stand against the might of the Dominion. Humanity was becoming more than a fleet. They were a symbol, a spark of hope in a galaxy overshadowed by fear. But the Dominion was not idle. They adapted quickly, learning from each defeat. Entire armadas moved to cut off human supply lines, and massive warships deployed in defensive formations around Volari colonies. They believed their firepower and experience would eventually crush the humans, yet humanity was always one step ahead. They had learned to anticipate, to plan, and to think like the enemy. Every battle became a lesson, every loss a teaching moment. Engineers devised new weapons, pilots perfected daring maneuvers, and crews worked tirelessly to repair damaged ships. They fought not because they sought glory, but because they understood the stakes. The Volari had once saved them, and now they had the power to save the Volari. The climax of the rising storm came when the Dominion assembled a massive fleet to strike the heart of Volari space. Thousands of ships bristling with weapons and shields advanced with precision. Human scouts reported the approaching armada. The odds were staggering, but Captain Vance remained calm. "We are not here to win through numbers," she reminded her crew. "We are here to stand for what is right, to fight for those who cannot defend themselves, and that is something no enemy can destroy." The humans prepared for the coming battle, rigging ships with traps, planning ambushes, and coordinating every squadron. The Volari lent their knowledge of local space, showing hidden lanes and safe passages. Even so, every officer knew the danger. Losses would be heavy and some ships would never return. But humanity would fight, not because they expected victory, but because they could not abandon their friends. As the fleet moved to intercept, the galaxy watched. The young humans, small in number but mighty in spirit, were about to face the Dominion's greatest armada. The stakes had never been higher. The Volari's survival, the honor of humanity, and the hope of countless civilizations depended on the courage of a species that refused to yield. Captain Vance looked out at the stars, her hand resting lightly on the console. "They think fear will stop us," she said softly. They do not understand that we fight not for ourselves, but for those who once fought for us. And that will give us strength they cannot imagine. The rising storm had begun, and the humans were ready to meet it with fire, fury, and unwavering heart. The final battle was coming. Across the edges of Valari space, the Dominion's armada gathered like a dark storm, a wall of ships stretching beyond the reach of human sensors. Every vessel was bristling with weapons, every crew trained in the art of destruction. They were confident, relentless, and cruel. They believed that humanity, though brave, would finally meet the limits of its strength. But humans did not fight like others. They had no empire to protect, no ambition to conquer, no greed for power. They fought for loyalty, for honor, and for friends who had once saved them when all hope seemed lost. And that gave them a strength no fleet of any size could match. Captain Mara Vance stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, surrounded by her officers. The stars stretched endlessly before them, scattered with asteroids, nebulae, and distant lights of friendly Valari worlds. Every crew member felt the weight of what was about to happen. They had faced the Dominion before, and survived against impossible odds, but this would be the greatest challenge yet. Remember, Mara said, her voice steady. We are not measured by numbers or size. We are measured by courage, ingenuity, and loyalty. Today we stand not just for ourselves, but for every Valari world that cannot fight, and we will not fail. Her words were simple, but they carried power. Every human on the fleet understood the truth. The debt they owed would be repaid with more than weapons. It would be repaid with heart. The first strike came before dawn in the cold darkness of space. Dominion scouts were intercepted by fast-moving human ships, their engines glowing like streaks of fire against the black backdrop. These ships were small old freighters converted into rapid assault vessels, yet they moved with precision, weaving through asteroid fields and nebulae, striking swiftly and retreating before the enemy could respond. Every strike slowed the Dominion's advance, creating confusion among their commanders. Communications were jammed, supply lines sabotaged, and small fleets attacked from multiple directions. The Dominion had expected humans to fight conventionally, but humanity was anything but conventional. They adapted, improvised, and struck with creativity that no one had seen before. The Valari watched in awe. They had once given humanity a chance to survive when their engines had failed, and their colonies were drifting in the void. Now, centuries later, humans were defending them with unmatched courage. Entire colonies that had been threatened by the Dominion were saved by daring maneuvers and clever attacks. Civilians and scientists were evacuated from worlds in danger. Each human action reminded the Valari that friendship and loyalty could change the course of history. One of the most daring operations involved a heavily armored Dominion battleship heading toward the Valari capital world. A small squadron of human ships led by Lieutenant Rena Torres intercepted it. Using the gravity of nearby asteroids, they launched themselves at impossible angles, striking weak points and deploying improvised energy mines. The battleship, confident in its strength, found itself disabled and forced to retreat. Torres's ship was battered, but her squadron's bravery ensured the safety of millions of Valari citizens. The Dominion, enraged by repeated failures, committed more of their forces. Massive warships moved to overwhelm human positions, their energy weapons glowing like suns ready to consume everything in their path. Yet humanity stood firm. Each ship, no matter how small, played its part. Each crew member knew the importance of every action. They fought not for glory, but for a promise made centuries ago. Captain Vance coordinated the fleet with skill and determination. Her plan relied on ambushes, traps, and psychological warfare. Human ships moved unpredictably, forcing the Dominion to split their forces and exposing vulnerabilities. Each engagement caused losses on both sides, but the humans' creativity and courage ensured that they could continue the fight, even when the Dominion's numbers seemed overwhelming. The climax of the battle took place near the Luminar Expanse, a region of dense nebulae and scattered asteroid fields. The Dominion had gathered their greatest fleet, determined to crush humanity once and for all. But the humans were ready. Every squadron had a specific mission: to protect Valari worlds, disable Dominion weapons, and confuse their fleet long enough for the Valari themselves to evacuate key installations. Captain Vance addressed her officers on the bridge of the Intrepid. This is the moment we were preparing for. Remember, our strength is not in numbers. It is in courage, ingenuity, and the loyalty that binds us. We fight today not just for victory, but to repay a debt of honor. Let us show them the fire of humanity." The fleet moved forward. Human ships darted between nebulae, hiding their approach, then struck with precision. Dominion warships, expecting straightforward attacks, were caught off guard. Explosions tore through the blackness of space. Beams of energy lit the nebulae, and the small human fleet became a storm of determination. Every human maneuver was calculated, but also daring. Engineers had set traps, mined asteroid fields, and rigged cargo ships to explode at critical moments. Pilots used gravitational slingshots, weaving between massive warships and striking from angles no enemy could anticipate. Each move was a combination of science, intuition, and courage. Even when a Dominion battleship cornered the Intrepid, Captain Vance did not falter. Using every ounce of skill, she maneuvered her ship through the ship's blind spots, deploying decoys and using the asteroid field to disable its weapons. The crew acted as one, a single organism moving with precision and purpose. By the end of the engagement, the battleship was crippled, forced to retreat, and the path to Valari space remained open. The battle raged for days. Ships were lost, sacrifices were made, and every human crew gave everything they had. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, humanity prevailed. They did not fight for conquest, wealth, or power. They fought to repay a debt, to protect those who had once protected them. That purpose, more than any weapon, gave them the edge. The Valari, observing the courage of their human allies, could hardly believe what they saw. They had once given guidance to a species barely ready for the stars. Now that same species was saving their civilization from destruction. Entire fleets, once confident of victory, were forced to retreat. For the first time, the Dominion realized that humans were not to be underestimated. Finally, after relentless battles, the Dominion withdrew. They had suffered too many losses, faced an enemy whose cunning, courage, and loyalty could not be defeated by brute force alone. The galaxy, which had once doubted humanity, now watched in awe. These young humans, who had once been protected by the Valari, had repaid a centuries-old debt with courage, intelligence, and unyielding heart. The Valari sent messages of thanks and relief. "You have done what we thought impossible," they said. "You honor us, yourselves, and every promise ever made. Your courage will be remembered across the galaxy." Captain Vance, exhausted but proud, stood on the bridge of the Intrepid. She looked out at the stars, thinking of the generations of humans who had worked, dreamed, and fought to reach this moment. "We were never alone," she said quietly. "And we never will be." The debt had been repaid, not quietly, but with fire and fury. Humans had proven a simple truth. It was not the size of the fleet, nor the power of weapons that determined victory, but the strength of will, the brilliance of mind, and the courage of spirit. They had arrived in Valari space to honor a promise, and they had left a lasting legacy across the stars. Other species, witnessing these events, began to reconsider humanity. No longer were humans seen as fragile or insignificant. They were clever, brave, and capable of remarkable courage. They were protectors, not conquerors. And the galaxy had learned something essential. Those who stand with Earth will never stand alone. The Valari, once fragile wanderers of the stars, now had allies whose loyalty was unmatched. The humans had saved lives, rebuilt hope, and shown that even the smallest hands could wield great power when guided by heart and courage. As fleets returned to Earth and the Valari worlds, celebrations were quiet but heartfelt. The heroes were honored, not for glory, but for fulfilling a debt of loyalty and honor. Captain Vance and her crew received accolades from every corner of the galaxy, but they remained humble. They had fought not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And somewhere, deep in the heart of space, the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging that humanity had lived up to the promise made centuries before. The story of humanity's courage spread across the galaxy. Scholars, historians, and storytellers recorded every battle, every act of bravery, and every clever maneuver. Children on distant colonies dreamed of joining the fleet, inspired by tales of ingenuity and loyalty. And among all the races, one truth became clear: humanity, small and young as it might be, had a heart larger than any weapon, a mind sharper than any strategy, and a spirit unbreakable by any enemy. The debt had been repaid, and humanity, in doing so, had carved its place among the stars, not as conquerors but as protectors, friends, and heroes.